Welcome to the MIF 2025 Artists in Conversation with, of course, Ntombizodwa Nyoni as well as Monique Touko, who worked on the incredible liberation that is still running at the Royal Exchange till the 19th of July.
Yep.
Yes. I mean, it took a while to get here, but we got here, babes. We all got here.
We here now.
I mean, in a way, let's start first with Zodwa. Obviously, this process was way longer for you. And can you share with us what planted the seed on working on this incredible moment in Manchester's history that, interestingly, a lot of people were not aware of?
I think that was it. It's that a lot of people were not aware of it. And I knew of the 5th Pan-African Congress. And I knew of Pan-Africanism, but more specifically about how the 5th Pan-African Congress really was like the turning point for the decolonization of Africa. I think that's the bit that I didn't know of. So once like the research began kind of through the Royal Exchange kind of offering that as a commission, I just delved into all of like the research. There was just like books and papers, and then all of people's kind of stories begin to emerge. People's like pathways into activism starts to emerge. The stories about women begin to emerge. Then you look at it as a whole, then you go, well, what is the story that sits within that? Because the thread of activism is there, but then I think what's slightly different now is like we have so much language about what it means to exist, what it means to participate in activism. So then now when you apply like our lens of today onto them, then you go, okay, to be that person of color in the 1945, to then be man, then be woman, you go, what did that do to their bodies? What did it do to their spirits? And that's where the play started to emerge.
And in your extensive research, and it was a lot of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you covered really a lot of ground. And like you say, obviously, you know, what was the impact of the context, you know, onto the African kind of body, you know, as of course, the piece itself starts to investigate a lot more. I'm just kind of curious, out of all of that extensive research, were there a number of things that immediately jumped out at you that allowed you to kind of, okay, this is the window, this is the kind of nexus where you start to, you know, begin writing the piece?
I think the idea around, sometimes when we think about activism and participation in like social justice movements, there's this notion that like it's all noble to be part of it. Everything is so noble. But actually within like the groups, there's interpersonal politics, there's betrayal, there's beefs. And that's when you go, okay, that is where the drama sits. Because the question is, how do you have these interpersonal relationships or kind of politics, but then still make a decision that we have to move forward together for the greater cause? But in order for us to move forward together for the greater cause, somebody in the midst of that is going to get sacrificed. So who then is sacrificed? Who is historically sacrificed? And it looked like a lot of the times it was the women. They were sacrificed for the greater cause, but they still showed up for the cause. And then when we looked at like how, for example, like if you look at like American politics and voting, it was black women who was then pushing the cause, but then they're still the ones who are then still getting sacrificed. So the question is, how do you then remain in the midst of the cause when you are also the person that's sacrificed for the greater cause? Drama.
Absolutely, and you know, I've said this to you before, you know, and perhaps it's conscious, perhaps unconscious. Mm-hmm. You've reserved the best lines for the two incredible black women characters, and also two incredible actors who played that role. Alma and
Amy Ashwood-Garvey,
you know, Leonie as well as Pam. And every time, you know, they go into that meaty monologue, it cuts through so many layers, you know, and that tension even within the bodies, with each other's bodies, you know, became quite palpable and visceral. And, you know, it's quite interesting also for me, right? I've seen a lot of shows at the Royal Exchange, but for the life of me, first previews, people were clapping between scenes. I was like, ooh, this is very interesting. Not a musical, but people were doing that. And this is really also a testament to, I think, you know, the power of the text, and also power of, I think, the performance of how it rallies around, you know, all of us who were present in that room. I'm just going to pursue a little bit more before I move on to Monique. You talked about that kind of inherent human flawed, you know, context, especially within, you know, trying to kind of push the cause and, trying to drive for certain change. And obviously, at the 5th Pan-African Congress, but the moment that was chosen to arrive here in Manchester, there have been previous kind of congress or rally calls, but obviously this one was in a way, kind of pushing through something much larger and much more fundamental. But of course, as we know, post this, nothing was resolved, And I want to ask this question of the flawed humanity, which is kind of quite difficult to get into, because I think also the politics by which, the environment talks about black bodies, talks about, how to construct the kind of Pan-Africa, it starts to make it quite challenging to kind of cut through this kind of challenges by which actually we're all human, and Amy has that precious line where she says, "I'm not perfect. I didn't say I was," So can I ask about your kind of trajectory in kind of navigating this? Because for those who have not seen it, we'll not talk too much. But it's really also how throughout the entire piece that kind of shifts. You want to talk a bit about that?
It's like multiple things, really. I think what's always fascinating about people is like their multiplicity and their flaws. And that's the pocket I want to write in. Because if you write like a one-dimensional idea of somebody, then I think you leave out a lot of information. And there's like a talk by the novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she did it like, I think it was like 2013. And it's called The Danger of a Single Story. And that idea talks about what happens when you look at a people, a group, a place with a single idea of who they are. You don't get the full sense of that picture. So I think even approaching these figures now, these historical figures, the danger is if you only look at them as historical figures, then you're not getting the full picture about what it means to be a leader, but what it means to be an activist. And I think there becomes like this idea that if you place them on like a hierarchy, as people on the ground, you're going, okay, how do I become that? Then the distance between me and them becomes so great. So then when Amy says, well, I'm not perfect, then you go, perfection isn't required for you to step up. Perfection isn't required for you to speak up. Participation is what's required of you. Speaking up and existing in that complexity is what's required of you. So to be able to write these characters is sitting in that pocket and going, I can't look at them and go, it's Kwame Nkrumah, because the name Kwame Nkrumah carries a lot of weight. But if you look at the character and go, in 1945, there was a 36-year-old man who had left university, who was feeling lost in his life. He had great ambition, but he was deeply afraid. That's the story. That's who you write about. And then you name him Kwame, because that's an easier thing to kind of tackle as a narrative. And then I think once you then look at like the scale of the narrative, the reality is even the idea around the change that they wanted to take place. When we look at like where we currently sit now in terms of the continent, there has been great shifts, there has been independence, but independence also doesn't necessarily mean that you then have freedom from colonialism. It doesn't mean you have kind of freedom from imperialism, because all that stuff still exists. If you also don't have like economic freedom, then you're still chained in some kind of way. And that's really what I think the narrative is about. It's like, what are all those layers that exist together? Because just to go, be an activist and it's great, it's simplifying the story.
Absolutely. And it is really in that complexity and the multiple layers, right, that also cuts through, a certain specific temporal frame, but also very clear structural frame of the Congress. So Monique, I know the two of you had a conversation even before I think the full script kind of came into being. I want to know from your perspective as the director, you have to process, deal with, wield all of these layers. So I want to hear from you, like what was your kind of focal point as you navigated this incredible piece of text?
Big question. Yeah, great, Ki-Hong, thank you. I would say the focal point initially was the city of Manchester. I was a student here. I went to the University of Manchester, did history and sociology. We treated Manchester as a character in the play, and we wanted to pay homage to it. So that was the first in terms of setting, and then understanding that audiences, their anchor to this play will be Manchester, so how can we pull it out and tease it out? So when it came to characterization, for example, Betty Dorman and Len Johnson became very important characters for us in terms of anchoring the audience in Manchester. Another thing that became a focal for us was that I think it's really easy with history plays for it to be a particular way and for it to really be specific of the time. And I wasn't interested in it looking like it was in 1945. We're really interested with playing with time and really interested in rebranding the Congress. That's what we said anyway. So when you come in and you saw the Pan-African cloth and you saw our logo, it was about how can we imagine it now? What would it look like now? How would it feel now? And that kind of went through to costume design. It went through to movement as well. It went through to set design in terms of how do we create this world. So it speaks to 1945, but it also speaks to 2025. That was really important.
Yeah, I mean, we also had this kind of conversation, earlier on, right? That in the end, what is it we wanted the audience to get out of this? I think with a historic play, there is a bit of that distance. It's like, okay, I'm listening to that story again, kind of played out back to you, right? But right at the get-go, we were talking about, thinking, what does it mean to be leaders of the future? Yeah? What does it mean to start revolutions of the future? Like we had this conversation that in our heads, okay, after they leave liberation, they're going to get out there and start a protest march and start a liberation and start a revolution. And that is that kind of, dirty energy, the blood, the sweat and all that kind of matters. I mean, we live in these very difficult times. And it's for me so powerful to go back to a moment of history and really learn from these flawed characters. And this is part of the problem of the world we live in, right? We never seem to learn. We never seem to kind of comprehend, actually, there are many who have come before us, who have made the same mistakes, and we tend to make the same ones again and again and again. And for me, I think that kind of understanding, locating it within that certain time, but at the same time, it kind of pushes to now and then potentially in the future. I love your first point that you talked to Sunny about, who's Sunny Dola from the Nest Collective, Kenya, Nairobi, did the costume as well as designed the Pan-African cloth. And your brief to Sunny was, I want to be able to wear the clothes that the characters wear. And I think it's great. Yes, we all wanted to steal the costumes. But what's more important is that what it means is that there is an immediate kind of connection, that you are these characters, that you are these potential leaders for you to kind of think about. I want to ask Monique, in terms of thinking about the setting. Like you said, Manchester became a very important kind of character. And obviously those who've seen the piece, the scenography reflects a lot of that. Because the World Exchange module is a very particular type of space, brilliant in so many ways because you can kind of play around with it. I want to ask, for the context of liberation, what were some of the kind of choices that you had to make thinking about that space? Because that space also has a very particular history.
It has a particular history. When we were approaching the building and the piece, we talked about reparations and about reclaiming the space. That's how we approached it initially. We knew we had a responsibility not just to activate the theatre, but to activate the main hall as well. So we really wanted to make a statement out there and ensure that there was a depiction separate to the exhibition that meant that people felt that they had entered an event and that they were delegates and they were going to be participants in the Congress as well. So there's quite impressive flags that have been put all around the hall. And also there's a pre-show that happens with one of our actors who kind of sets the scene. And the reason why we put him there was to kind of activate the voice of the youth. Wanting more, wanting different, wanting better. And there was something about highlighting the brilliance of my cast and their musical talent. So yeah, we felt a real responsibility to not only activate externally but internally, and also ensure that the place felt fluid, that all of those doors were being used, it was all accessible, we're playing all different levels, and our screens became a really important depiction of different settings, time of day, etc.
I want to ask you, you mentioned about youth, and obviously this is, throughout the whole piece, both in terms of, I think, direction as well as text, it kind of cuts through very clearly. This whole question of the intergenerational kind of mirror, right? That you have the older generation that have the secret meetings, all this gossips about, okay, these newbies on the scene, and then talk about it. And then the young people also having the kind of struggle in taking on the weight of the previous generation. Can you talk a bit about this kind of intergenerational interplay, and it's beautifully cutting through all the characters. You have double mirrors, throughout the piece.
There were definitely kind of mirrors in the play, but also understanding that the elders in the play were also somebody else's mentee at one point. So then they also had to figure out, like, how do they map out their own path to liberation? And then thinking about what do they also then pass down to the next generation. And I think particularly when you're talking about the idea who gets to lead, what ideology are we using in that kind of leadership? There's this tussle that exists in, like, who's right, but also understanding that the world that you're also going to or the world that the younger generation are going to exist in may be slightly different from the one that you're existing in. So we have to decide, like, where do ideologies meet? And sometimes some people just don't want to let go. They don't want to let go of the reins. They don't want to pass down the baton. They don't want to think differently. But even just thinking back to, like, your theme this year, you have to dream differently in order to think about what's the world that's coming up, where we're going to be now in the next 10, 15, 20 years. We have to think about it differently.
The mirrors were a beautiful challenge, because when you create mirrors like that, you then have to cast them, right? And then you have to cast them in a way where they actually match. So for me, it was a beautiful challenge in terms of finding people where I was really interested not just about the interpersonal relationships, but how the bodies looked on stage, and having different bodies and different representations on stage was really important to me. So I feel like we have such a beautiful cast, not just aesthetically, but just in terms of what they offer, in terms of their acting ability. They are each other's match. And I think that's why the piece is done so well, because I think everybody gets their moment as well to shine and to really kind of stress these differences between the young and the old, and how you learn from each other ultimately. Because not only was that happening in the play, but it was also happening in the rehearsal room, which was beautiful to see.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you talked about kind of casting, right? That, well, apart from their skill as performers, kind of really taking it on. Because we did talk about, especially in rehearsals, right? Yeah. There's a lot about also the actors themselves as people, with also with egos, with, like, anxieties, with all sorts of different contexts and background, because they all come from, range from, different experiences on film, television, and stage, and I think that also starts to shape them as actors in terms of how they deal with something like this. I want to ask essentially, that kind of very interesting kind of deftness by which you kind of play with the semiotics of I think the look you kind of throughout, and obviously your conversation with Sunny in the costumes facilitate a lot of that as well, because in a way that kind of intergenerational tension, because they talked about it also in the piece, right? They are kind of also mirrors of their younger selves, that they see themselves in the younger, and the younger see themselves also in the elder. And I want to ask about this because, this has gone on for a long, long time. Within many institutions, many kind of whatever context, the hegemony of the existing power will never step aside. Will refuse to step aside because there's the innate fear of losing it, right? And when you encounter somebody potentially that can, I wouldn't want to use the word replace, but basically come on so that your era goes. I want to ask about this kind of tension. And what was it like for you as a director, navigating this with actors who are also of different generation, but also through the characters?
I would say that we were really lucky in our room that everyone was really supportive and really understood where everyone was at. And I think one of the things I did say to the actors is that this is your interpretation of Kwame Nkrumah, of Amy Ashford Garvey. It's not an impersonation, and also this isn't a tribute show. So hopefully that allowed them some kind of freeness to kind of have some kind of characterization that was born from them and solely embodied from them. And I think one of the things that we did say was, how can we learn from each other? How can we support each other? There's going to be days, you know, on a Monday where I'm feeling weak and I'm feeling tired. How can you lift me up and how can you support me? So the support that was happening in the play was definitely happening in the room. And I do believe that, you know, they're coming from completely different generations in terms of the way theatre's made as well. It's a completely different time. So the conversations I was having with Eamon were very different to the conversations I was having with Rudolph, and correctly. But it was also very exciting because it meant for me I had to manage quite a few temperaments and also adjust the room according to these different personalities.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating, right, that actually in Liberation, and I suspect this is partly why audiences have taken to it so quickly, because there is a true line of very clear honesty, you know, that you kind of experience it, not just in receiving it, but it's just the energy in the room that quite immediately, you know, it's like, there, honey, there is no like, okay, this is the play, we'll come and see a play, you know, enjoy the show kind of situation, but it's boom, you're kind of in it. And in a way, I want to ask, it's gone on for about maybe 2 weeks now, you know, and I want to ask, how are the actors doing in kind of almost like another week to go?
They're doing really well. I've left them alone now. You know, normally when, you know, we're working in previews, they're in from like, poor things. They're in really early, they finish really late. I'm giving them 10,000 notes. So I think now they actually have their lives back and they're really happy. They're in a flow. I think they're having really great responses from audiences, so that's really encouraging. And I think when you're making something that is a world premiere, you don't know whether it works till you have an audience. So I think now we've got the gratification, now we know that the thing works. There's a confidence there, and they're absolutely they're thriving, they're loving it, they're loving it.
Yeah. You know, I still remember like right up to preview and even maybe post-preview slightly, that the text was, you know, still...
Edits, yeah.
Yeah.
Small.
I want to ask, do you have this innate desire, Zotwa, to still tinker it?
All the time. All the time. And
Okay.
also, it also comes from like audience responses, and you go, okay, I could tweak that line, or like, I could like expand that moment. But I think there's also that decision that you make as well as a writer where you go, I've done my part. And the things I'm trying to tinker now are things that actually are played with by a director, or played with by costume or movement by actors. And I think I had to let go of this assumption that like, I fix everything, I do everything, but actually no, it's a living thing, so it has to breathe on stage, and then it's no longer my responsibility to edit lines.
I'm going to give you the space to dream a little bit. If there's one thing, you can only pick one, that you would want to just push it up a couple of notch, what is it?
One thing. Oh my God.
Sorry, you're going to get one. I know you have like 10,000 things.
Nothing. It's perfect now. It's perfect. It's exactly what it's supposed to be now. Do you know what it is? I think the one thing that I've actually accepted is that there's also going to be, the play is published. So I think what the play then also does is in its play text is that there's bits that I can also put back in. You know, when you want to have like 2 more 3 lines in a speech, you can put that in the play text. But what's really wonderful about what exists in like the live production is the sum of everybody's work. And that thing is beautiful. That work that they've done together is beautiful. So that thing continues to exist. If you want to go dissect text, go by the play. It's wonderful.
Good plug. I want to go back to really the scenography, you know, because I think in some sense that whole symbol of the bee, given that it's Manchester, given that I think it was set in Manchester, you know, some 85 years ago, what was it about, I think, you know, the question of the beehive, you know, that was quite central, because I think I personally also didn't quite realize it until we had a run in the space and all of that. That became quite an interesting kind of true line. You want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's really hard, I think, when you're approaching a text about a place, because you don't want to make any assumptions.
Yeah.
And also you see this bee everywhere, and you don't know actually what the people feel about the
Yeah.
bee as well.
Yeah.
And I didn't want it to feel too touristy or too tourist, the lens to be not right. But the symbolism of the hive in terms of the hexagon, the representation on the floor, our screen being in that shape as well, felt like a really necessary foundation for us. And a configuration that felt right, and it felt like the meeting of things coming together. So when I was working with Paul Wills, the set designer, we really thought about what will the stage look like, the need for levels. There's something about actually seeing the actors struggle up and what that means in terms of the fight, in terms of actually getting to somewhere and what the podium represents. So that through line and the journeys in the space were really important for us. And then if you look at the floor, it's like a kind of indigo blue. So there was something about having to travel seas in order to get to Manchester, etc., and the through line with that. And when it came to the screens, it really felt that that was our opportunity to bring it to 2025. It gave us variety, it gave us colors, it gave us texture. It meant that we could be slightly more abstract as well. And it gave information. The hardest thing, I think, with this piece was that you had 10 characters that people don't know about. So it really felt that our opening in terms of that procession was really important in terms of establishing character and introducing the audience to what kind of style this was going to be as well. I work with a movement director called Chloe Dean, and we love openings and we love endings. And we want to always start a piece where the audience are not necessarily thinking about the text, they're thinking about the bodies and they're thinking about the world in which they're in. So that was why the procession was really important. And then with the camera sequence at the end, I think honestly that's one of Chloe's best work. I've worked with her many times, but that one really does take my breath away. And I think there was something about the lasting memory we wanted the piece to have on the audience. And I think we achieved that with that final sequence.
I remember during load-in, the first time I saw the physical floor that was built in that space, and I told Paul this. I said, Mike, it really reminded me of an interpretation of the map of Africa. You know, but at the same time, you know, I remember the first versions. I can't remember which version I read first time. that Sue's passed to us. You know, it was about the pride of the different African nations parading in their you know, cloth and clothes, and which is why immediately I thought of Sunny, because that's, you know, works in a space of, you know, within Nest Collective, you know, they invent their own kind of textile and cloth, you know, rethinking what does it mean to pass on your cloth to future generations, but you know, in a way, hence that the kind of almost catwalk, you know, parading kind of made so much sense in that, you know. But for me, the use of that screen in relation also to lighting, you know, how it completely fills the entire room. That you're always enveloped in it. You're always immersed in it. That it's not to light the actors only, but to light all of us. So every time I'm just revealing stuff, right, for people who have not seen it. But every time that a speech is made, the lights come on, there is the echo in the text. It's very clearly like speaking to a large room of delegates. Before we open up questions to the floor, one question I want to ask the both of you is your relationship with each other. Because it was very evident for me that this is also built on a certain friendship and built on a certain sisterhood that it's pure joy for me to witness throughout the process. So I want to ask you to talk about this, because why I'm asking this is because, and this goes back to the heart of the piece of liberation, which is about the people. The character Alma has a line, well, I would say advice to, Amy has the advice to Alma saying that always remember, do not eat alone. Always somebody to share a meal with you. Talk about this friendship and sisterhood.
Well, where do I start? I would say that she gifted me with something that I could only have taken on now at this point in my career in terms of scale and in terms of expectation. I'm so blessed to have found you, Zodwa. And I think we found each other at the right time as well. There was something about timing, and there's also something about intention. And we really care about the work. And I think we're really interested in changing things, and not necessarily from an industry point of view, but just in terms of like the stories that are being told and the way in which they're being told. And we're really, really interested in centering the woman, centering the Black woman, and speaking from a place of truth and commonality. We're both Zimbabwean women as well. So there's a lot of things where it's like, okay, we are aligned, and I just feel for her, man. She's been carrying this for like 6-7 years. It's a weight, so I had to kind of come under it and hold it as well. And I feel like hopefully I've held it with you, Zodwa. I really hope so.
No, for sure. You definitely have held it. And I think it makes me think a lot about, kind of Issa Rae had said this idea about how you have to build the people next to you. Because we have a tendency of always looking at the people above and chasing those people. But actually, I wanted to make community here. And I'd seen Monique's work. Like, I had been following Monique's work. And I was like, I'm going to find this woman, and I'm going to ask her to work with me. Because I respected your work. And I respected your vision. And I think that's the thing that you look for, like, in the team that you want to make work with, and particularly make work that you deeply care about and you respect. There's no one else that could have done it with. And I'm so, so thankful you stuck with me. I'm so thankful.
I really want to thank you both for this. Thank you very much.